Hello, thank you for coming. My name is Anna. I am a quality assurance specialist here at Milwaukee County Community Access Recovery Services. As a quality assurance specialist, one of my roles is to be the client's rights specialist for all of the community services. So today, we are going to be talking about protecting clients' rights, talking about confidentiality and filing grievances. I think this training is important not just for CCS, but for all programs. We cover all the programs under community services. I would be the client's rights specialist for that. So this will talk about all clients' rights in general, and then the specifics applying to CCS. The purpose of this training is to provide an understanding of the specific rights of clients, to know what steps to take when assisting clients with potential rights violations, and how to be prepared with what to expect. This is useful for your knowledge, but also useful for the clients. Sometimes it can be a stressful situation. They can be concerned, afraid, and in a situation where you're assisting a client, it's really important for you to kind of know what's going on and how things are going to play out so that you can help guide them through it and comfort them. What we'll be covering is some basic information, some acronyms, some contacts. There's lots of acronyms here at CARS. There's one right there. We'll be going over a general overview of client rights and confidentiality. We'll be talking about community services rights. I want to mention that there is an inpatient and CBRF. There are inpatient and CBRF rights. Majority of the community services rights are the same. There are some additional ones. However, today is going to be focusing mostly on community services. We'll be talking about the understanding a complaint versus a grievance, a formal resolution and an informal resolution. Complaints and a grievance resolution procedures, the internal and the county process, who becomes involved, timelines, investigation, appeals, things of that nature. Then we'll move on to caregiver misconduct, and then those CCS specifics. And finally, there are lots of references. The reason there's a lot of handouts for this and a lot of reference pages is because all of these materials are found online, both at the state level and here at the county. I think are really useful. Some of those useful references for those who aren't present at the training here should possibly print those off ahead of time and use them as they walk through. All of you should have a whole bunch of materials in front of you that should kind of make this a little bit easier. So I think with that said, I think the next thing we'll go into is just some of this basic information, some acronyms, because I use these a lot, lots to type out. So we all know what CARS is, a CRS, and this I put this in there because it's not to be confused with the program CRS. A CRS is Client's Rights Specialist. DHS is the Department of Human Services in Madison. DQA is the Division of Quality Assurance in Madison. CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations, which coincides also with the DHS, and an ROI, Release of Information. Most of you know that, but one of the really important things that all of you should be doing is knowing who your agency's client's rights specialist is. It is part of state regulation and our policies and procedures that every agency has an identified person who processes their client's rights. Does anyone think they know who it is maybe? I found sometimes they're changing, it's an ongoing thing. It's really important for you to nail down who that is and then get the information. Have that phone number on hand, have it available for yourself to give to your clients. I've put my information up there, a contact, direct contact, and a main number if I'm unavailable, and my email, in addition to the contact information for Madison. There's times where clients will just go directly to the agency. There's times they're going to bypass, go to the state, go to the county level. It can kind of vary, so it's really important that you kind of keep those three primary contacts available. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be covering here DHS 51 and DHS 94. Any and all recipients of mental health, alcohol and drug abuse, and or developmental disabilities have the following rights. You'll have this brochure in front of you. This is kind of, these next two slides are the abbreviated version of what this is. This is a really important piece. CARS has their own version, again, something else that we are modifying right now. So this one is found directly on the DHS website. You can access it at any time. I have a link to it. We also have it in Spanish, in addition to having access to the CBRF and inpatient version as well. So this is the community services one. All clients have personal rights. These personal rights include being treated with dignity and respect, free from any verbal, physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. I think this is always an obvious one. We all know that these apply. Some are harder to prove than others. They have the right to fair and reasonable decisions about their care. They need to be involved. CCS is a client-driven program. Sometimes we feel like we're making the best choice for the client, but it really needs to be involving them. We can have our input, but ultimately what that client chooses. And you have to be really careful about deciding, are you choosing this for the client or are they? They have the right to be treated. They may not be treated unfairly because of their race, national origin, sex, age, religion, disability, or sexual orientation. We serve a multitude of clients, something I'm very proud of. We have lots of different communities here, and this feeds right into this as well. You may not be made to work except for personal housekeeping chores. If you agree to do other work, you must be paid. So those, the daily living skills and such that they're operating under in the CBRF, those things are okay. A lot of those are teaching them how to live independently, but beyond that, having them complete your home, those are the things where we start to get that territory of, is this a client's rights violation? They are to make their own decisions about things like getting married, voting, writing a will, etc. Obviously, age limits and if they have a guardian or not would apply there, but with CCS, we don't have guardians. So they have the right to use their own money as they choose, and they need to have consent to be filmed, photographed, videotaped, or anything like that. As far as treatment-related rights, this starts to get into the program. So again, this is where making sure that we're doing what the client wants, also within the parameters of what they're capable of, but including their voice in this. They are to be provided with prompt and adequate treatment, rehabilitation, educational services. They're to be involved in their treatment planning. Their treatment needs to be informed. They need to understand what is going on. And if it's something that's not meeting their needs or they don't feel comfortable with, we need to come up with alternatives. No treatment or medication may be given to them without their written informed consent unless it is needed in an emergency. When they come into the hospital, or clients that are coming into the hospital may be forced to take certain medications under certain legalities. In the CBRF, clients that don't take their medication, it's something that's documented. If it's a consistent concern, that's when we want to start looking at treatment options, treatment approaches, but they can't be forced. They may not be given unnecessary or excessive medication, and this is something to be watching for with clients. If you start to have concerns that possibly they're over-medicated, if they're voicing they're feeling over-medicated, it's important that this is something you talk about, because it's a possibility someone besides yourself may be violating a right with excessive medications. It's things to always be aware of, even if you're not providing that service. They must be informed in writing of any costs of their care and treatment for which they or their relatives will have to pay. And they must be treated in the least restrictive manner in setting necessary to achieve the purpose and mission of the program. Clients who are in the CBRFs may want to eventually move into an apartment, and it's something that they should work towards, even if we feel they're not ready or it's not something that we want. If it's something they've voiced and we can work towards getting there and it takes some work, then that's what we should be shifting towards. We shouldn't be keeping them in a CBRF because there's a financial gain, there's no room elsewhere, we can't find an apartment. If they're able to make it and we can set up the programs to support them, that's what we should be moving towards. Next, we're going to talk about DHS 51 and DHS 92. Small change in regulations with 92 and the subchapters for 51. This is confidentiality, records privacy, and access to records. This is something I think a lot of the providers I have contact with don't know about. Well, they know about confidentiality. That's always one that we have ingrained in us, but also, and that records cannot be released without consent. But I think the biggest one is that clients do have access to their records. Now, clients can request to see their records at any time when they are in treatment. Regulations, though, allow us to have a little bit of a limitation on that. We may not want to give them all access to records. If a client requests to see their records and we have to hold back a few things, maybe because it'll affect their therapy or whatnot at that time, they have a right to challenge that. When a client is discharged, they have access to all of their records. One key thing as far as what they always have access to is anything regarding medication and physical. So any of their treatment notes, CBRF notes, those things may sometimes want to be limited, but they can always challenge that, and it needs to be done in writing. Anything that they do challenge that the staff is not willing to change, clients always have the option to have an addendum to that. I had one where a client had contacted me about, she felt a case manager wrote inaccurate information in her file. She was very upset by it. It actually affected other facets in her life where she couldn't move forward with certain things. So in the discussion and kind of intervening there, we decided that there wasn't enough evidence to support that the information was false. But the client was allowed to write her statement involving that. She was able to give it to her attorney. She was able to put it in her file. And that was the best option for her. And she felt comfortable with that because that addendum, in addition to the other notes, were then given to the courts, which did ultimately affect her situation. She got to tell her story. And finally, a copy of all clients' rights need to be made available upon request. I have truthfully had people tell clients that they shouldn't report that, or they don't need to read that, or that's not applicable to them or this situation. So really be careful. It's not something I see often, but I just always want to put it out there based on some of those experiences. One of the things that I think was interesting that Tamara talked about on the documentation module was how we're documenting. Always remember your clients can read your documentation. So that's really important with this. If a client were to read a note that had derogatory comments and negativity in it, there's a possibility that they could take that note and file a grievance based on that. So we really want to, and not because we need to be looking over our shoulders when we're providing care and worried about those things. Ultimately, the goal is to be providing dignified care. But if it's something that you would not feel comfortable with the client reading, it definitely shouldn't be written. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between a complaint and a grievance. I probably receive, I receive lots of calls. A lot of them turn out to be complaints that we can handle informally, which is great. It's usually a program conflict, maybe a conflict with the care coordinator, something that we just kind of need to work out. Ideally, hopefully they all are like that, because that's just, personality conflicts. It's the more they progress, the little scarier it gets for the client. Regardless if it's a complaint or a grievance, there's a 45-day reporting period. So it's really important if a client comes to you with a concern or something that they report that immediately to the client's rights specialist. I have had clients call me 2-3 years later, and I'll always listen. We'll always take it into consideration. I had somebody come here who wanted to talk about 20 years ago. It was something that was important. We took down the information and we looked at it as, what can we do as quality assurance and quality improvement to make some changes here? Are these things still going on? Are these concerns? And it turned out to be kind of a nice learning experience for us. As far as a complaint, those tend to have that informal resolution. Nothing really comes up in writing. There's no formal report that's written, submitted to the agency. Usually the client's rights specialist will work between the parties involved to rectify the situation, and this can be done program level or county level. Clients can always go to the client's rights specialist at the agency. If they don't feel comfortable, they can jump over to us. And if they don't want to do that, they can go right to the state. They have lots of options there. And at any time when handling one of these complaints, whether it's within the agency or for myself, if we're handling informally and they're not happy, we can always turn it into a formal grievance. If they're feeling like there's not enough being done, this isn't satisfying me. If it is turned into a formal grievance, or if they do call and they want to have a formal grievance, again, that 45-day reporting period applies, but it ends up with more of a formal resolution. This is something where the client's rights specialist is going to open an investigation, they're going to render a decision, and they're going to offer that right to appeal. Some of the things that will come into play here is that it could be at the program level within the agency, it could be at our level, it could even be at the state level. It's time sensitive. There's time frames. It has to be processed. The decision has to be rendered. There's lots of different little time frames there. I have some flow charts that'll kind of show you what some of that is. This at times can include program recommendations. It can include corrective action by the agency or by the provider. There are some situations that we will receive the call and they have not reported to the agency, and we'll kind of turn it back to the agency to have them kind of investigate and process it. A lot of times we'll contact the supervisor, the program manager, and have them kind of do an investigation, at which point they'll return it to us, and there's this little go back and forth. Ultimately, all grievances that are become a formal grievance, they have to be reported to us. So they have to come to me right now. If we handled every single one that came through independently, that would be a lot. But it's really nice to work with the agencies because I think that it removes some of that distance. There's a lot more face-to-face interaction. There's a lot more team approach. It's not just the same team they've had. We have new people involved, and sometimes just that's like a breath of fresh air for a client. And again, at any time, this can be converted back to an informal grievance. Sometimes it stirs that pot enough that people start re-looking at things. Okay, what can we do differently here? And those little changes start to make the client feel better, and they're like, okay, things are better. I'm good. I don't need to move forward with this. It's amazing what just having some, a fresh face and new people coming into the situation can do. All decisions made can be appealed to the program director here at CARS and or the state. So when we were to render a report, substantiated or not, the client always has the right to appeal that, and there's some timelines, 14 to 30 days on some of that stuff. So there's a process. I like to try and keep it as free-flowing and as easily manageable as possible. Again, this can sometimes be very stressful for the clients. This is your orange handout. I really think this is going to be a useful tool for you guys to take back with you. I also have it on a link in the references that it can be printed out. This offers a nice little flow chart of what the client can expect when they're filing a grievance, whether internally with their agency or when they bring it to the county or even the state level. Okay, so this is always something that I suggest looking at if you have a concern or offering it to your clients. We won't go through that whole thing. You guys can. Okay, so here's some examples. I want to walk through this first one. This is going to be a complaint. This is going to be more of an informal approach to handling a grievance. A CCS client, Tom, appears to be struggling with meeting with his care coordinator, Sarah. He does not appear to want to talk with Sarah. He contacts the CRS at CARS and reports he wants to file a complaint against Sarah because she's not doing her job and states she is avoiding him. The CRS contacts Sarah, Sarah's supervisor, and reviews Sarah's case documentation. Sarah's supervisor informs CRS that in staffing Tom, Sarah has reported Tom often oversleeps and misses his appointments with Sarah. Documentation supports that Sarah has made several attempts to meet with Tom and that she consistently follows up with phone calls to reschedule missed meetings. This is very key here. That documentation is kind of what would save Sarah. That's why it's really important to document. I request documentation all the time, 90 days plus. We can go far back, and we're reading all of that stuff. There's been times I've been reading this documentation and find another issue with something else. So keep that in mind, that can be your lifeline at times too. CRS discusses with Sarah, the supervisor, possibilities for a later meeting and asks Tom if he would feel comfortable meeting with Sarah and her supervisor at their office to make a new schedule, and Tom agrees. Sarah's supervisor reports back to the CRS when the meeting is scheduled, in addition to when the meeting is concluded and the outcomes of that meeting. The CRS follows up with Tom a few weeks later after his meeting occurs, and Tom does not report any further concerns. He states afternoon meetings are working better. So this is something where Tom was feeling frustrated, he was upset, he wanted to file a complaint. And in talking with him and working with him, there may have been a lack of communication. This is a difficult job. Sarah might have been burnt out. I've been over there so many times. I can't reach him. I don't know what to do. Tom's feeling this. He's feeling frustrated. And it was one of those things that, okay, let's reassess. Sometimes even having just the client's rights specialist present at that meeting opens up this whole new line of communication between two people that have been working together for 2 years. So it's amazing sometimes just what having a different perspective can do. This would have been something informal. Nothing formal would have been written and submitted to the client. We would keep record of it. The agency would keep record of it. Sarah would hopefully document about it, but nothing further would really be processed from something like this. This one, on the other hand, the grievance, this is taking it kind of to the next step. So this is Jimmy and Bill. I love coming up with these names. All right, the CCS client, Jimmy, is receiving psychotherapy from Bill. He's also receiving medication management, but through a different agency. Bill reports Jimmy to be symptomatic, although Jimmy disagrees. They have discussed a possible medication increase in therapy, but Jimmy does not feel this is necessary. He reports he does not like how he feels when he is on a higher dose. Following a discouraging therapy session with Jimmy, Bill decides to contact the medication management agency to discuss his concerns. However, Bill failed to check to see if he had obtained a release of information from Jimmy. Bill thought he had done this at Jimmy's admission appointment several months ago. Lots of paperwork at admission. Sometimes it's kind of that mundane process of, okay, sign this, sign this, sign this, sign this. You get into these habits, so it's really important to be checking those files. During a medication appointment, Jimmy has learned that Bill has expressed concern with the agency and becomes frustrated that this happened without his permission, and he contacts us. We open an investigation, and it is learned through a records request where his entire file and all the documentation was requested for review that Bill did not have a release of information for the medication management agency at the time of his contact, and that Jimmy's grievance was substantiated as a violation of rights due to sharing confidentiality treatment information without consent. It happened that quickly, and Bill's intent was probably very pure. Due to the nature of intent behind Bill's actions, a caregiver misconduct was not substantiated. So that's really important. It was something that you could see Bill didn't mean to do this to upset the client. He was genuinely concerned. He felt like, okay, I need to take this to the next level. But because he didn't have that paperwork, this fell on his shoulders as violating his rights. The agency and Bill were put on a corrective action plan, and this, which included a confidentiality training for all staff and a change in Jimmy's psychotherapist. CAR's CRS required deadlines, and the client was informed of these outcomes in writing as well as informed of his right to appeal. So there have been occasional times where a client wants more of a reprimand. That's not what our job is to do. They've appealed and gone to the state. They want to see that psychotherapist fired. And that is not a scare tactic. It happens, and that's why it's important for yourselves to protect yourself, but primarily because the information that's going back and forth, we don't want to damage the clients. And truthfully, even though Bill's intention is good here, having to switch psychotherapists could be really difficult for the client, and he may not have even seen that coming. Now I have to switch therapists, I have to start over. Oh man, like this could really become something that troubles the client, and we don't want to have that either. So it's really looking at both sides. Okay. So from here, we're going to take it into caregiver misconduct. These are always a little more nerve-wracking. These caregiver misconduct will consist of abuse, neglect, and or misappropriation. It's intentional, careless, and or negligent. Caregiver misconducts must be submitted to the state. They must be communicated to us as well, and often require some type of corrective action plan by the agency. Taking this a step further, when they're reported to the state, sometimes the state will file it and look at it, file it, and take note of it. Other times they'll investigate further. This can sometimes result in the loss of a license, the inability to practice in the state of Wisconsin. It can really go far. So again, protecting ourselves and protecting our clients. Because the services may be intended to be very helpful, but if it results in violating their rights or a caregiver misconduct, it could become troublesome for yourself as well. This next one, another good little chart to keep track of this. I think physical and sexual abuse are the ones that we all think are the big red flags. We all, okay, that's a given. But some of this emotional and mental abuse would be the ones that I think are much harder to prove, but happen a lot more than we realize. Humiliation, harassment, intimidation. If a client reports a concern or a grievance, files a complaint, whatever, and that staff that they filed against goes and confronts that client and asks them why they did that, even if they're just wondering why, that can be considered intimidation. How do you think that client is going to feel? Oh no, now you know. Now what? You know, and this is a very sensitive population that we're dealing with. How are they going to feel about that? Are they going to be afraid to ever report something down the road if it happens? And those are the concerns that we have to have. Being very careful with this. My advice is, if a client is to ever file a grievance against yourself, is to Allow supervisors and your peers to work with a client or work in a setting where you're not alone. And I think this is something that would make the client more comfortable too. This is on the reference page. It can be printed out. It's another thing. I also gave it to you guys in the green handout. It's another thing useful to keep on hand to show clients, because a lot of times, and it's scary how often they think that certain treatment is normal. They've been in CBRFs or in assisted living apartments for a long time, their whole lives, and they don't realize that being talked to a certain way is not acceptable, because that's what they've endured for years, and they think that's the way it's supposed to go. So continually educating them. Another useful flow chart on understanding. This is the pink printout. Understanding how caregiver misconduct works and kind of filtering through, is this a caregiver misconduct? It isn't up to you guys to figure these things out. It's your responsibility to report it. But it is useful to kind of help you see something that maybe you didn't realize. Wow, that is not okay to be doing that. These are things to kind of help you filter through what you might be dealing with so you can better prepare yourself and help prepare your client. Okay, last one. This is a caregiver misconduct example of Chris and Mary. A CCS client, Chris, lives in a CBRF. Mary works in the CBRF on second shift. Chris and her peers in the CBRF appear to enjoy when Mary is present. She's observed being supportive of the clients and engaging in conversation often. Mary also has 3 children and has discussed with other employees financial struggles and the cost of having small children. During a first shift, another employee overhears Chris talking to a peer about money that Mary borrowed the day before and hoping that she would bring it to her that day. The employee gathers more information from the client and reports the incident to a supervisor. The supervisor begins to investigate the allegations, contacts the agency's client's rights specialist, completes the investigation within the timeline, and follows procedures. A week following the incident, we're notified in writing of the incident and that the claims made by Chris were substantiated. Mary had in fact borrowed Chris's allowance to put gas in her car. Although Mary reported intentions to immediately pay the money back, the agency concluded Mary had violated Chris's rights by misappropriation of money and terminated her from her position. This written report was found by CARS CRS to be satisfactory in resolving the grievance. Sometimes we'll go back and ask more information. There might be this back and forth, but it was confirmed that a copy of the written report had been submitted to the state. This would go on to the Caregiver Misconduct Registry. Chris was also notified in writing and given information on her right to appeal. This is very important. In addition to that, especially due to the nature of the relationship with Mary, Chris was counseled by staff to ensure she understood that she was not at fault and was comfortable moving forward. There's a positive relationship here. Mary seemed like she was very good with the clients. It's very unfortunate. Mary may not have understood. Maybe things were just really difficult for her. But that's why educating yourselves is so important. The client should know these things, but they don't always know them before they happen. And because of that positive relationship, the client felt comfortable doing that. On the flip side, sometimes these clients can be very easily manipulated. And if someone has poor intentions, we don't want to see that happen either. So I think the really important thing to point out here is that this is third-party reporting. If you see something happening or hear about something happening and it's a violating of rights or concerns with caregiver misconduct, you need to be reporting that. I can get really sticky if someone doesn't report it, because then there's the question of, well, you knew, so what was your role in that? We have had that happen going all the way up to the top of an agency where there was a violation of rights. Other staff knew and reported it to supervisors. Supervisors didn't do much. Then that other staff went and reported it even further along with other clients. Still nothing was done, to the point where we find out that someone at the top knew and just didn't do anything. That is a big issue. It's not something that happens often, but if we find out or the state finds out, that can cause a lot of problems. Ultimately, my concern there is this client is living in this environment without the safety and security that they should have, especially when we're talking about coming from the top. They should be able to go into a facility and feel comfortable and safe. Okay. CCS Specific. This is care coordinator responsibilities according to the policies and procedures laid out in CARS. This also follows state regulations. All these materials need to be given to clients at admission. It's really important that they get a copy of a brochure and anything else that you'd find useful to let them know this is what your rights are, as well as an open discussion to make sure that they know they understand. There's always going to be additional policies and procedures outside of state regulations. We pretty much coincide with that, but we're at the county level, we're allowed to have additional requirements. So having a thorough knowledge of those things and that you're following the process, and there's a procedure for everything, so making sure you know how to do that. Giving them this information for vital voices and disability rights, making sure clients know that they can always contact them, and there's some contact numbers right there for you. So put that with your little contact information packet that you're going to make. And then finally, ensure that you have proper releases of information signed and dated. This has to be done annually. So double checking those, because if they're expired, that can become a problem as well. And make sure they're stored in that central file on site with the rest of the client's belonging stuff. So we have 2 full pages of materials. This goes into regulations. These can all be printed off, stored wherever you need them to be. I think that this Wisconsin DHS Clients' Rights is a really great site. I really like it. There's so many neat things on there. And those brochures can be found for the inpatient and residential, as well as the community services at those links, and they can be printed out and used for your reference too.